Before we begin, I want to embarrass our guest by adding a little more praise. We've been in a founders revival for the last 10 or 12 or perhaps more years, and like the founding itself, it's been a collective enterprise. There are many writers involved in it making different contributions. But also like the founding, there's been an indispensable man, and I believe that's Joe Ellis. He was there at the beginning of the Founders Revival. He brought the knowledge and the unimpeachable credentials of the Academy, and he joined them with a literate, readable style. It's a peerless combination, and I'm very pleased to be here. And I greatly enjoyed your book, which I finished yesterday. But just taking off that introduction, you...
I'll take it.
No, but you talk about the numbers of people who made the founding, and you say that, you know, the most prominent ones that you're going to be discussing are sort of the obvious first string.
Developed on what I call the Casablanca principle.
That's right, the usual suspects.
We round up the usual suspects. Yeah.
But you devoted a lot of space, and more space than I've ever seen, to a man who is mentioned in every book on this period, but not really gone into enough. And he was a remarkable, very unusual character. He was also a man of color, and that's James McGillivray.
Oh, right.
So maybe, I mean, tell us all about this guy. He was quite a character.
Yeah, I discovered this guy. I mean, actually, he was more well-known in the late 19th century. Theodore Roosevelt wrote about him at one point in time and said he was the greatest person ever to come out of Alabama, which might not necessarily be the highest compliment. But McGillivray was a mixed blood. He was 3/4 white and 1/4 Creek, and his father was Scottish and was a Tory and had his estate confiscated and went back to Scotland. His mother was half French and half Creek, but because Creek society was matrilineal, he was regarded by the Creek nation as full-blood Creek. He had a classical education in Charleston, South Carolina. He read Latin and Greek. He spoke or wrote French, Spanish, English, and Greek. He was well read, so that when the Americans announced at the end of the Revolution that, according to the Treaty of 1783, all the land between the Alleghenies and the Mississippi was now American territory, he said, "We never signed that treaty." And we weren't invited. He's also a totally unscrupulous character. He is the Talleyrand of the Southwest. And Washington and his Secretary of War, Henry Knox, identify McGillivray as the one guy who could be able to control the Creek Nation. And the Creek Nation is sort of like the Iroquois of the South. They have a lot of other tribes that depend upon them, the Choctaw. If we can sign a model treaty with them, we can avoid Indian removal. This is a big, big deal. One of the great failures of the founding is the inability to reach a just settlement with the Native Americans. And Washington and Knox devote most of his first term. This is the thing Washington really cares about. Nobody's written about this enough.
And he had a lot of dealings himself with various
His earlier
Indians.
dealings and during the French and Indian War wouldn't necessarily clue you into the fact that he was he changed by this time, Washington had. He really wanted to avoid Indian removal because he believed that the Native American populations had a right to the soil, and that to dispossess them was to violate the principles of the Revolution. And Knox agreed with him. In fact, when you read some of Knox's stuff, it's almost like a cultural anthropologist today writing about the need to preserve And what they want to do is create a series. My chair is positioned in such a way that I'm looking only at half of you, and so let me try to look over here periodically. What they want to do is create a series of enclaves or homelands between the Alleghenies and the Mississippi that will allow the Native Americans to be protected. And the key political decision, in fact, still obtains. That's how we got casinos. Is that the Native Americans are sovereign nations. They are just as sovereign as England or France or Italy.
Didn't John Marshall, he later
Marshall's
called them dependent
decisions later
sovereign
on
nations?
qualified that a little bit, but Marshall, who is a protege
Right.
of Washington, as you know very well, and worshiped the ground he walked on, he thinks he's acting in Washington's legacy, in the Worcester decisions and the Cherokee decisions in 1830 and 1833. Calls them quasi-nations. But if they're nations, then the executive branch of the government is the place to deal with them. And with the support of, the Senate, then you can pass treaties. Those treaties are law. The federal government is then obliged to regard those laws as inviolable. And Washington thought it was his personal word, too. So he signs a treaty with McGillivray. He invites McGillivray to come to New York, where the capital is.
And this was a great show.
Oh, it's a
was it
big
not?
deal. Like, McGillivray and 27 other Creek Braves, fully feathered, show up. They stay a month. They drink every night with Washington and with Knox. The Congress takes a recess to greet them. They say they are treated with more ceremonial splendor than any ambassador from England or France. And in some sense, that's sensible, because this treaty is more important, because it's whether we're going to have war on the borders for the duration. They sign the treaty. McGillivray agrees to the terms, although McGillivray is interesting. He thinks ultimately that the United States is going to dissolve.
Not a foolish opinion.
No, I mean, it's because he's reading the European experts who all believe that this republic will not survive. What's Lincoln's words? Whether this nation so conceived and stated can long endure. And so he thinks it's okay. He's a realist.
This is his holding operation.
If they want to pay me money and they're going to pay him money, he needs to be bribed. And his other chiefs need to be bribed. Then he'll sign this treaty. The problem with the treaty from the American side is they cannot enforce it. There are so many settlers coming from Georgia and South and North Carolina moving across the Alleghenies. They can't stop them. Knox says it would have required a military force of 50,000 troops. This at a time when the total size of the American army is 2,000.
Right.
Okay? And Washington says, what will it take? A Chinese wall? In some sense, a just solution to the Native American problem is made impossible by democracy.
Because these people
These
are
are
free
individuals
to
pursuing their
pick up and
happiness.
move,
They want land, right? And here's some numbers. In 1783, at the end of the war, there are 5,000 whites west of the Alleghenies. In 1800, in the second census, there are 500,000.
Well, and
Okay,
then
so you can't stop them. You just can't stop them. And so Indian removal becomes inevitable.
and
But Washington doesn't want it, and McGillivray, he keeps thinking, I'll beat him. I've got 5,000 warriors I can call at a moment's notice. There's great correspondence from McGillivray where he says, we ran into this group of Georgians that want to settle in our country, in Creek country. There's like 300 of them, families. And they negotiated with me, and they said, will you let us live in your kingdom? And McGillivray says, I juggled with them. and I left them unclear. I told my braves, if they settle, kill